All right, well, welcome everyone. Good evening. Welcome to tonight's lesson. Obviously, hopefully you see the presentation on the screen, and this is our Getting Published, Writing Effective Letters to the Editor lesson. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in tonight's event. I believe that both emails that you received included a link to an attendees guide with a screenshot that shows an example of the attendee interface. But if you did not, you should see over in your control panel a little section that says handouts, and you should be able to download the attendees guide right from there. But pretty much you just need to sit back and listen. Your system is set up, or when you automatically join a GoToMeeting webinar, to use your computer speaker system by default. But if you would prefer to join over the phone, you can select telephone in that audio pane section of the control panel, and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions by typing your questions into the questions pane of your control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll collect those and address them during the Q&A session when we get to that. Or you can raise your hand by clicking the little hand icon that you should see in your attendees toolbar. And when we get to the question and answer session, we'll unmute your line so that you can ask your question. This lesson is being recorded, and it will be uploaded to the CCU page on CCL Community, and also our YouTube and iTunes account by Monday of next week. But no further ado, I'm working my way through this new script as well. I would now like to introduce Steve Volk. He is Citizens Climate Lobby's Communications Director. And Steve, if you would like to introduce yourself and kick us off for this evening.
Sure. So as Rick was saying, I'm the Communications Director for Citizens Climate. Prior to joining CCL, which that happened in 2009, I worked for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for about 30 years or so. I was actually on the news desk, and I did design and edited copy and wrote headlines and that sort of thing. So I've developed a good sense of news and what it takes to get published in a newspaper. Believe me, I've seen a lot of bad copy that gets submitted to newspapers, and it's like, wow. But anyway, so what we're going to do tonight is kind of go through the various things, like why it's important for us to get letters to the editor published, and we'll talk a little bit about the news hierarchy. These are things in the newspaper that you can look for in certain sections that improve your chances of getting a letter published. We'll run through, there's a basic formula for a letter to the editor, and we'll take a look at that, and then we'll have some tips and protocol. Talk a little bit about the importance of kind of forming a team of writers in your group to improve the chances of getting published. And we'll talk a little bit about what you do after your letter gets published, and then maybe take a look at a couple of examples of some letters to the editor that were published. So let's kind of roll along here. So the first thing, let's talk about the importance of letters to the editor. First thing I want to say is a lot of people, they have this attitude about newspapers that, oh gosh, the newspapers are dying. Who reads newspapers? Nobody. The people who read the newspapers are the people who represent you in Congress. They still read the newspapers. Newspapers are probably the biggest bang for your buck in terms of communications. Atlanta Journal-Constitution here, for instance, has a daily circulation of 100,000, and if you consider that each copy of the newspaper is read by 3 people, that's 300,000 people that are looking at the newspaper every day. And I believe a survey that I saw somewhere said that about 40% of the newspaper readers read the letters to the editor. They're probably one of the best read features in the newspaper. So That's I just kind of wanted to get that out of the way first. You know, a lot of people say, oh, why do we even bother with newspapers in the day of, you know, Google and the internet and everything? No, they're still a factor. They're still a factor, and your letters actually, you know, they get printed online too in the newspaper's website, and they're easy to share on social media and that sort of thing. So here's some of the factors involved with newspapers and letters to the editor and why these are important. So first of all, the newspaper prints the things that they feel are newsworthy. And so the importance of this is that it sends a signal to your member of Congress that the newspaper feels that your topic is newsworthy. And so, you know, then the other thing is that you know, the volume of letters on a particular topic sends a signal about the community's interest in that topic. So just by submitting a letter to the editor, even if it's not a great letter, it signals to the newspaper that this is an important topic, and the more letters that they get on a topic, the more likely they are to assign and to select stories that are related to that topic. So if they get a lot of letters to the editor about climate change, the editors are going to say, wow, a lot of our readers want to read this stuff. As they see these stories come across on the wire, they start to run them more. Another factor is that the letters to the editor tell what's happening at home. So a member of Congress will use the letters to the editor in the newspaper to get the pulse of what's happening in their district. You know, what are people concerned about? Well, they don't have to look too far to figure out what they're concerned about if they check the letters to the editor. And then the last thing is that the letters to the editor provide visibility for CCL in the community. You know, if your letter identifies you as a CCL volunteer or a CCL leader or something like that, and that could be a good way to find new members. People would see you in there and they go, wow, what's this Citizens Climate Lobby? I need to look them up. So moving on here, what's the very first thing that you would think you need to do to get a letter to the editor in the newspaper? And the very first thing that you need to do is to simply read the newspaper. So the newspaper is only going to select letters that respond to something that was in the newspaper. You just can't sit down and write a letter about climate change and not have it be referenced to an article that was in the newspaper. It won't get published. And so therefore, by reading the newspaper every day, what you're doing is you're looking for letter to the editor opportunities that you can respond to, and you'll be amazed. In the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, for instance, a week doesn't go by when we don't get at least 3 really solid letter to the editor opportunities in terms of the, you know, what's in the newspaper. So, but to find these opportunities, you have to read the newspaper every day. And as you're in the newspaper and you're looking for these letter to the editor opportunities, I have a hierarchy of things that you can be looking at that will improve your chances of getting published. So number one is, if you see an editorial in the newspaper that somehow you can relate to the topic of climate change and climate change solutions, that's probably your best opportunity, because that's the official view of the newspaper. And if you send a letter to the editor that's responding to the official view of the newspaper, those letters are going to be prioritized for publication. And so right behind that, you know, kind of a close second would be stories that appear on the front page of the newspaper. So if you see a story on the front page of the paper and you can relate it to climate change somehow, that's an excellent opportunity. So then moving down the hierarchy a little bit, there's staff-written columns, and I differentiate staff columns from syndicated columns. So as the name implies, these are columns that are written by staff writers at the newspaper. They're not like George Will or Paul Krugman or those kinds of people who get distributed all around the country. And the reason for that is that the staff-written columns kind of represent the brand of the newspaper. And so whenever there's a letter to the editor that's referencing one of the staff columnists, it's almost like they're running a promotion for the newspaper. So they like those. They like letters that respond to staff-written columns. They also like letters that respond to locally written op-eds. Editorial cartoons are often a great source of letter to the editor opportunities. You see a lot of climate change cartoons in the newspaper, and those are good to respond to. Then kind of moving down the ladder there a little bit, there would be the syndicated columnists, as I mentioned before, and sometimes you can respond to another letter to the editor. So if you see a letter to the editor that's from a denier or something like that, I'm sorry, a skeptic. So if you'll see a letter to the editor from a climate skeptic, you can respond to that there's a good chance they might actually print it. And then last but certainly not least are the inside news stories. And I put that at the bottom of the hierarchy, but they're still worth responding to because a lot of times newspapers have a very local slant to the stories that they select on the front page, and so the international and the national news will appear inside, but that doesn't mean the newspaper won't run any letters responding to those stories. So move on down to the letter to the editor formula, and it's when you stop and look at this, it makes sense. It's fairly straightforward. And the thing about the letters to the editor is that a lot of times the newspaper will put a word limit on the letters that's really that can be brutally short. Like in Journal-Constitution here in Atlanta has a limit of 150 words. So that's probably about the shortest that you would see, but so most newspapers you probably get like 200 words or so, but even then it's kind of short. It's I call letters to the editor kind of the haiku of advocacy, because you're basically talking about like 3 short paragraphs to get in there and make your point and get out. So in structuring your letter, the first thing that you'd want to do is reference the story that you're responding to. Do that right up front at the very beginning of the letter, so that the editor who is reading the letters and selecting the letters will know right away, or can be able to figure out right away what it is that you're responding to. And a lot of times I'll even help them out a little bit more. I'll put, and most of the time you'll be emailing these letters. I don't know anybody these days who actually writes a longhand letter to the editor and sends it in. But if you're emailing the letter to the editor, a lot of times a good technique is to put the headline of the article that you're responding to in the subject line of your email. So you would have RE : and then whatever the headline was, and that makes it easy for the editor to match up with the story that you're responding to. So then after you've referenced the article, transition from that. So sometimes you'll be responding to something that, a story that screams climate change. Sometimes you're going to be responding to a story where you have to kind of connect the dots a little bit. If you're writing a letter to the editor about the floods down in Houston, for instance, that happened this week when they had 2 feet of water fall in something like 24 hours. Yeah, you're going to have to connect some dots a little bit about how this is related to climate change. So transition into how the story that you're responding to relates to climate change, and then identify a solution. And I don't think you all need any help with the solution here. It's the thing that we've been talking about for 6 or 7 years now. It's carbon fee and dividend. But sometimes you can you don't always have to be too specific. With it's nice to have all the details in there, but if you're short on space, just you can kind of use a little bit of a shorthand in terms of identifying the solution. Like revenue neutral fee on carbon, where the money is given back to households. That sort of thing. And then there's a call to action. And a lot of times, if you include in the call to action the name of your member of Congress, whether it's your representative or your senator, that's very good, because what happens each day is that the aides to these members of Congress, they Google their boss every day, and they do a Google News search on their boss's name, and they say, oh, hey, there's somebody wrote a letter to the editor and mentioned you in it. So this call to action is usually requesting something like Congress to take action, or your senator to support this type of legislation and so forth. But it's nice to have a call to action in your letter to the editor, and then close out your letter. You can be a little creative. You can employ some rhetorical devices, repetition, some wordplay. Probably the easiest thing to do with a close on a letter is to do something that I call closing the circle, and that's to kind of come back around to the thing that you opened your letter with. It's a nice way to sort of tie things up in a neat bow there by coming back to what you were talking about at the beginning. So and you can employ metaphors and wit and that sort of thing, but it's okay to be humorous, but don't be disrespectful. We're not that group. You can be a little bit of snark goes a long way, but try to be more upbeat and positive, and don't denigrate people who may disagree, or are members of Congress or anything like that. So a few more tips about the letter. You want to be careful to word your letter to the editor in a way that's going to turn people off by raising hot button issues. Like back a while ago, the Keystone XL pipeline was a hot button issue, or talking about nuclear or power or that kind of thing. Just kind of try to stay on point, and don't go off the rails too much with things that can kind of polarize the readers. Don't lecture or regurgitate the laser talks. Try to be very conversational in your writing with these letters. And as I mentioned, if you mention your member of Congress by name, that's going to be very effective. Be respectful, and in terms of the dire warnings and gloom and doom about climate change, do that very sparingly. Do that kind of judiciously. But and if you do, always couple that with a solution. Because if you just kind of leave people with the world's going to end tomorrow, and you don't say how we can avoid that, then people just kind of shut down after that. So one of the things that I'd like to suggest with letters to the editor is that people form a team of letter writers in your group, because the newspaper often selects letters based on the volume of responses that they get on a particular article. And so if they get several letters on a particular article, that will improve the chances that at least one of those letters will get published. So get a list of the volunteers in your group who like to write letters to the editor, and that then becomes your team. And then one of those people in your group then should be assigned to read the newspaper every day to find the letters to the editor opportunities. And so when they do find those opportunities, they can pass those opportunities on to the rest of the team and invite the team to submit their letters to the editor. I used to be concerned about people submitting letters that all sounded the same or something like that. But after a while, I discovered that you can get 4 or 5 people writing a letter that responds to the same story, and you'll get 4 or 5 totally different letters to the editor. So I've come to the opinion that that's not something really to worry about too much. People are going to quite differently. They are. I wouldn't be too concerned that the letters are going to end up being too similar. And even if your letter does not get published, you get, as a volunteer who has submitted a letter to the editor, if one of your other teammates gets published, well, it's like you get an assist. There's the guy who takes the ball to the hoop in basketball, but there's also somebody who has to pass the ball to them, and they get an assist on it. So if somebody gets published in your group and you submitted a letter on the same article, you get an assist because that your letter probably helped to have the letters editor determine that they wanted to publish a letter on that particular article. So let's move on down to, okay, so what do you do after you've gotten published? I'm published. I'm done. No, you're not done. You can send a little thank you note to the letters editor, and that's a lot of times you'll get when they're checking the authenticity of your letter to make to verify that you're the person who sent the letter. Sometimes they'll do that by email. Sometimes they'll do that by calling you up on the phone. If you know who the letters editor is, it's nice to thank them when the letter does get published. Usually, I just thank them when they call to verify my letter. I thank them for selecting the letter and tell them I look forward to seeing it in the paper. Then you want to send a copy of the letter with a link to your district's CCL liaison. So if you're not the congressional liaison for your senators and your representative, make sure that the liaison gets that letter so that they can then send it to the member's office. Because it's kind of like, okay, well, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, that's not making a whole lot of noise. So the way that you're going to make noise is to make sure that letter gets to the congressional offices. And then make sure that you submit a field report, or whoever is assigned in your group to submit field reports. Make sure that they get the letter and that they're going to file a field report. And tell your chapter and your chapter leader. We do a thing at with our Atlanta group where we do kind of like a roll of honor each month for the people who get letters to the editor published and the people who submit letters to the editor. So so you want to celebrate your successes with your colleagues in your group. So let's take a little bit of a look here at a couple of examples. Let me see how much time we've got here. Let's see. So we're at 8:20. I think we'll go through one example here, and then we'll stop for questions. So there was a story in the Tampa Bay Times about higher tides because of climate change, and that they're going to make flooding from hurricanes worse, and that sort of thing. So so we had a volunteer who got a letter published, and so the first thing they did with the letter was to reference that story. So their letter opened up by saying, thanks for Craig Pittman's informative article on high tides getting higher and threatening businesses, homes, and infrastructure while raising everyone's flood insurance rates. Okay, so we did what we needed to do in the opening paragraph there, and that was reference the story. And then they moved into the transition to how this relates to climate change. So then they say, okay, Governor Rick Scott isn't so sure about man-made climate change. One would think the governor of Florida, where 95% of the population lives within 35 miles of the coast, would nonetheless take out climate change insurance to protect his state. Climate change insurance means doing what the vast majority of scientists and economists say to do to slow climate change, even if the governor isn't 100% sure it is happening. That is what insurance means. When there is uncertainty, buy protection. The vast majority of scientists say greenhouse gas emissions, primarily from fossil fuel use, are the cause of climate change. So climate insurance would entail lowering these emissions. Okay, so, and then after that, then present the solution. Moreover, the vast majority of scientists and economists say the best way to lower emissions is with a national revenue-neutral carbon tax that would reduce emissions in all sectors of our economy efficiently and equitably. If Congress requires that the tax be rebated to households, then consumers would be protected from price increases. And then the close of the letter. And if costs go up a little bit, consider it a small price to pay to protect your house, business, land, food supply, water supply, and your family's lives. So I'm going to skip the second example here, Ricky, and let's go to questions here now.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you a second to catch your breath there. Maybe get a little drink of water, Steve. So if you have a question, go ahead and you can use the question pane that's on the right-hand side in your control panel, or you can also raise your hand, and then I'll unmute your line and you can ask your question. The first question we got, Steve, actually we got two sort of very similar questions. One is, is the limit that a newspaper puts on your letter, is that a hard limit in terms of words, like 200 or 250? What's the penalty for going over on that?
You can probably go over. I wouldn't go over more than about 10 words because there's two things that will happen at that point. Either one, they'll say, oh, the letter's too long. Okay, let's take a look at another letter, and they'll just reject it on the spot. Or they'll edit the letter for you. And sometimes they'll take out the very thing that you thought was most important in the letter. So you don't want to leave it to the editor to get the letter down below the limit. And they put these limits on there because they want to try to get as many letters in the newspaper as possible. So they don't want one letter that's like 300 or 400 words long or anything like that. That's starting to venture into op-ed territory there. But they want to try to get as many letters and as many viewpoints in the paper as possible, and that's why they put the limit on there. And they pretty much, adhere to that. Like I say, you can probably, there's a little bit of a leeway there. If you go about maybe 10 words over, they'll probably let it slide, but I wouldn't do much more than that.
Great. All right, we also have Wes. Wes has raised his hand. So Wes, I'm going to unmute your line and go ahead and feel free to ask your question, Wes.
Well, on this topic of going over, I just had this conversation with a local editor here in Portsmouth. I was noticing that the rule is 300 words, and I was seeing letters 500 words and more.
Oh, really?
And it turns out that they make certain allowances. And so what I've done is I've just cranked this into the conversation that I'm having with these editors, where I'm building a personal relationship with each editor and each paper that I'm working with here in the state.
Oh, excellent. Okay, okay. What, 500 words? So I like that is op-ed length.
It is there's no question about it, Steve.
Yeah, yeah. And God, if you can't say what you need to say in 300 words, there's something wrong. And actually, there's a lot of virtue in brevity. Let's put it this way, because people are pressed for time, and if a letter's too long, it's kind of like, oh God, that's too long. I'm not going to read that. But I think 200 is like the perfect length, personally. You know, to say what you need to say, and
you're clearly thinner than I am.
Yeah. I mean,
but I'm definitely a 250 to 300 word kind of guy.
Okay, okay, okay. Yeah, and you know, if you've got a lot to say, and that's fine, I would start doing op-eds. You know, talk to the editors at the paper and say, hey, look, there's you know, this or that going on in a couple of weeks, you know, like Earth Day or something like that. How would you like, you know, 500 or 600 word op-ed on this particular topic? And so the nice thing about op-eds is that you get more room to play and make your point, and you get a bigger headline. You get more attention. So so if you're writing letters that are, you know, venturing over, you know, 300 words or something like that, yeah, it's time to move into op-eds, I think.
Great. Thanks for the question, Wes. So we're going to go ahead and move on to Tim, and I guess it might even be Paula there, because there's two people on the line. But Tim and Paula, what's your question?
Actually, it is my question, but we are both here. The question I had is, I may have missed it, but Steve, did you say if you get published to also share it on social media, like your Facebook and your Twitter account, if you have one?
Yes, yes, that's the way to get more mileage out of it. So if you get published, look your letter up on the newspaper's website, and you can share that link. You can tweet it. You can share it on Facebook. You can go to your Facebook page and you know, share the link on there with your letter. And you know, this way it's a great way to you know, have your friends find out what it is that you're doing on this particular issue and so forth. And you'd be surprised how many of your quote-unquote Facebook friends, you know, may not even know that that climate change is important to you. You know, so by posting those letters on Facebook, you're kind of, I guess, initiating that conversation with people that you know. Tweeting is a great thing to do too. And what I would do is tweet the letter to your congressman. So so if you're on Twitter and you can look up your congressman's Twitter handle, and you put them right at the very beginning. And the thing about putting their Twitter handle at the beginning of a tweet is that if the tweet starts with the Twitter handle, they're the only ones that are going to see it for the most part, unless somebody is, you know, following the Twitter feed or the notifications for your member of Congress or something like that. But if you put a period in front of it, a little piece of punctuation, then your tweet kind of becomes more public, and so all of your followers will see the tweet and so forth. But it's so you can get you can tweet your member of Congress with that letter to the editor, and if you're kind of making it public, maybe some other people will retweet it. And you might even have a little thing going with your group where you tell some of your the volunteers in your group, hey, I got a letter, I'm going to tweet it to Congressman Smith here. Would you all be willing to do the same? And so if you get like about 4 or 5 of you tweeting them, with that letter to the editor, chances are pretty good then it's going to get on their radar. The people who are on staff who monitor the social media for the member of Congress will take notice of a letter that gets tweeted multiple times. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We should definitely do that. That kind of segues into a quick second question. You mentioned sharing the letter with your liaison. I typically like to just go and do a web submission to my member of Congress and say, hey, I wrote this letter and blah, blah, blah. Is that just as good as having a liaison do it, or?
Oh, that's fine. So as a constituent, yeah, if you're using their web form or something like that, that's great to go ahead and share it that way. The liaison however, is doing something a little bit different. They're not submitting through a web form or anything like that. The liaison is developing a relationship with the policy aide in the congressman's office. The person who is focused on environment and energy issues. So in terms of developing that relationship and looking for reasons for them to be in touch with that aide, sharing a letter to the editor with them is a great excuse for them to be in touch with the aide and so forth. So do both. Yeah. Submit it on the web form, but also share it with the liaison so that they can then share it with the person in the congressman's office that they communicate with.
Great. Good idea. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Tim. Appreciate the question there. And also, I just shared a link in the chat window with everyone to a page on Community that's got some really curated letter to the editor examples. Some of the things that Steve's picked out over the past couple of months that are just really good examples for you to draw some inspiration from. So you can always find that as well in Community by just typing in letter to the editor in the search function, and it should pop up in the first couple of results there. We still have a couple of minutes for questions. If anyone wants to raise their hand on their control panel or type the question into the chat window, or into the question pane, I'm sorry. Yeah, it doesn't look like we have any further questions. So Steve, would you like to, you got any parting words for everyone this evening?
And just to kind of reiterate, the first and most important step to get a letter to the editor published is simply to read the newspaper. That is half the battle there. If you find something good to respond to, you've got a great chance of getting published, and you got a real good chance if multiple letters are submitted. I think once you've got a few of these under your belt and you start sharpening your letter skills and your writing skills and so forth, start thinking about, okay, maybe it's time for me to graduate to op-eds and so forth. And if you go on Community, we've done webinars in the past about how to draft and submit an op-ed and so forth. So once you've got this mastered, think about the next step. And like I say, we've got a webinar on Community that you can check out that'll help you get started with that. And I'm sure at some point we will probably do that webinar again here live.
Great. Well, thanks, Steve, and thank you, everyone, for attending tonight's Writing Effective Letters to the Editor lesson. If you have any other questions, Steve, your email address was there on the screen just a few moments ago, but it's just steve@citizensclimatelobby.org. Not
actually, Ricky, that's so. Yeah, we kind of just like within the last year or something, we shortened our email, so it's steve@citizensclimate.org.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did I say Citizens Climate Lobby? Yeah, sorry about that.
Right. No, that's okay. That's easy to do.
I totally forgot that. But yeah, so real quick, up on next week's lesson on next Thursday night, Dr. Danny Richter, our legislative director, is going to give us an update on the household impact study. So for all you who may be going to DC in June or meeting with your members of Congress or members of the media to talk to them about the household impact study, we're going to have an update to that. Kevin Ummel, the author of the study, was able to do a little bit more work on there, so we're going to have some more information to share with everyone next Thursday night. But that's it for tonight. On behalf of everyone at CCL, thanks for all you do, and thanks for joining us. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, Rick.